Well, good morning, everybody. How y'all doing? Yeah, good, good. You look good. You have that going for you, right? Oh man, it is. It's really good to see you guys this morning. Pumped to be with you. If you're a guest, my name is Michael Bailey. I'm one of the pastors here at Midtown Fellowship. I'm excited as always to get to be with you as we open up God's Word together. If you're joining us online, because we are finally live streaming our gatherings for those folks who aren't yet able to kind of come be with us in public, I want to say, hey, we are so glad that you're joining us where you can. We really, really miss you, and we can't wait until you're able to be back with us again. We're really looking forward to that day. But like I was saying, pumped to get to be with you guys as we continue our series that we are calling The Family of God right now, where we are looking at our relationships together as God's people. And here's how I want to get in this morning. So I am in my mid-30s at this point, about to turn the corner into my late 30s. But this is where I'm at, and I am coming to realize that a essential ingredient to living through your 30s or turning into your mid-30s is that you begin to realize just how much you've become exactly like your parents. It's a real thing. So you have this moment. It's almost like a rite of passage where you have this moment, and he goes, "I swore I was never going to be this way, and oh my gosh, I'm exactly like them." So this became really apparent for me this week. So my mother, God bless her, she is a very high energy, very talkative woman, believe it or not. And she stayed with us this past week to help us do the whole virtual school thing while Lauren and I had to work. And so she was a tremendous blessing to us. But one night after the kids had gone to bed, she and I and Lauren, we were sitting in the den just enjoying each other's company, reminiscing about life, sharing stories and that whole deal. And at one point in time, my mom just, she launches into a story about something that she remembers from my childhood. And it just kind of spurs on this memory in me where I then I remember that. And I launch into a story of my own. And then she hears that story and launches into another story of her own, to which I, of course, respond with another story of my own. And we just become this high energy ball of talkative whatever. And we're going and going and going. And about 2 hours later, my wife and I are getting ready for bed. And I realize, Lauren, you didn't really talk all that much tonight. You didn't contribute to all the storytelling that we were doing. And I was like, are you okay, babe? Like, is everything all right? Did I say something that made you mad? I'm trying to cover my bases here. And she goes, oh yeah, I'm fine. I just realized that you and your mother share a brain. And it was, at first I wanted to be offended, but then I thought about it and I realized, oh, she's right. Like 100%. She's right. And this kind of touches on something that we all kind of know, right? That our people shape us. Who we come from often determines or often impacts who we are and who we will be. And I don't just mean our biological families when I say that, though it certainly includes them. But the complex web of relationships, all the relationships we have that we come from, profoundly shape who we are and how we operate in life, right? So sometimes this happens in benign ways, like being just a little bit too talkative, like my mother, sometimes in really beautiful ways, and sometimes in really destructive ways. But like Malcolm Gladwell asserts in his book, Outliers, we cannot separate who we are from where we're from. And as we consider what it means to be the church and be the people of God, I actually think this is a very important thing for us to understand as well. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, this idea that our people shape us, in truth, is exactly how God designed this whole humanity thing to work. Here's what I mean. So last week, we talked about how the eternally existent family of God, the Trinity, right? That the eternally existent family of God created mankind to enjoy the loving relationship that he had been eternally enjoying since before time began, and to become a people who spread it. That we will become a people who share this loving relationship wherever we go, with whoever we're with, that he has been enjoying as well. So his first instructions to humanity in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 were, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Essentially, go and fill the earth with more people like you. Go make more humans. Make a family, and a big one. Make a big family, more humans to do and be and enjoy the very things that I have created you to do and be and enjoy. He says the same thing to Noah in Genesis 9, verse 1, after humanity makes a royal mess of things. He says, go, fill the earth, multiply. And again with Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, in verse 1, he goes, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So God calls Abraham away from his family of origin, away from his homeland, and says, "I want you to go to where I will lead you. And when you do, in turn, I'm going to make you into a great family. I'm going to make your descendants as many as the stars in the sky. I'm going to turn you into a great nation, but not just for your sake, not just for your individual family's sake, but for all the families of the world. All families are going to find their blessing in yours." And this eventually becomes the story of Israel and the story of Jesus. Essentially, the point is that God has always been in the business of family creation. He has always been in the business of family creation, of making a people. And I want you to hear what he says to the family he formed, how he chooses to guide them. This is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 7. It reads, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise." Now, in the Hebrew tradition, this passage is included in what is called the Shema. And it was a central prayer for the Hebrew people, much like the Lord's Prayer is for Christians today. And right here in the thick of it, you can see that what God calls his people to do, what he wants for them to do, is he wants for them to pass down who he is. He wants them to pass down the things he said and the things he's done to those who would come after them, essentially to pass down his legacy of love and faithfulness to whomever is in their midst. Basically, he intends for each subsequent generation to pass down what they have learned and received from him. And I love the way that our downtown kids and families pastor with our family of churches kind of drew this up. It's nothing really profound, but it provides, I think, a great visual of how God has designed all of this to work. Check this chart out. This is how he drew it up. Like I said, it's nothing crazy profound, but essentially the gist is that God's love and wisdom and grace are meant to flow down through each subsequent generation, forming them and shaping them into God's vision for humanity, his vision for human flourishing, maturity, and health. That this is what his people are meant to do. This is what he wants for families. This is what family does. This is what family, in essence, is meant to do. And this is why I think family is such a powerful idea for us, one that comes with so much nostalgia, because whether you had a great one or a terrible one, I think the majority of us know on some level, like, family is meant to work like this. Family is meant to be this type of thing, that this multi-generational web of a community of unconditional love and support that reflects the love of God, like we talked about last week, and guides those connected to it, or guides those within it to true flourishing, to be who they were really meant to be, to have the life God intended for them to have. Where those who have gone before pass down what they have learned and gained to those who come after them. Where the conflicts and struggles and trials that life throws at them are collectively shared and endured by the tribe. Where responsibility is shared and character is developed and skills are gained. Where grace is extended 1,000 times over. And there's always a place for you at the table, no matter what you've done or how far you've gone. Where everyone in the web of relationships is blessed because love and wisdom, protection, care, concern, growth, and a million other things that need to take place to form and shape you into the human you were made to be are happening. It reminds me of an article that I read not too long ago, maybe a few years at this point, an article that I read that was called "I Miss the Village," and it was by an African-American mother named Bunmi Laratan. And I just want to read you an excerpt of what she says because I think it captures some of this idea. She says, "I miss the village I never had. The one with mothers doing the washing side by side, clucking and laughing hysterically, tired in body, but quick in spirit. We'd know each other so well, annoying one another from time to time, but never staying mad long, because the truth is, we need each other. The children would wake up early as they tend to and run outside. They'd disappear into the field and forest for a day of play as we'd start our sacred work. We'd knead bread side by side, the littles at our feet. It would be impossible to tell whose children belonged to whom because we'd all attend to the group of toddling wee ones. The days would be full of conversation as we expertly flexed a muscle that has since gone weak, the art of listening. Quiet empathy in lieu of passive judgment. And when called for, gentle, sincere advice. In our village, our members are our estate, and we build them up. I think it's a really, really beautiful picture. A really beautiful picture of what family and community and a people are meant to be. But also at the same time, it's a little bit harrowing, isn't it? Because on some level, it resonates with us. Because here she's grieving. She's grieving the loss of a community or a family of people that she never had in the modern world. A community that the modern world, in her estimation, doesn't actually afford to her. A people who shoulder life and work and trial together. And she's really touching on something biblical here. That we are not meant to do life alone. That we were made to belong to a people and to shoulder life with a people. The problem is that instead of our relationships looking like this, the first chart, right? Our web of relationships, including but not limited to our families, even the best of them, looks a lot more like this. Like we mentioned last week, well, I'll say it this way. Often instead of purely what I would call the waterfall of God's love pouring into each generation from the ones prior, our families instead become this mixed stream, right? This mixed stream that includes a lot of sin, a lot of pain, and a lot of brokenness. And like we mentioned briefly last week, the result of sin introduces all kinds of brokenness and mess into our relationships, both with God and with each other. So what happens is wounds become a part of our story, right? Wounds become a part of our story. And you can call them wounds, or you can call them hurts, or you can call them generational sin or dysfunction or whatever you want to call them. But instead of relationships being this incredible living source of stability, warmth, and joy, they become a source of some of our deepest pain. So parents get divorced. Siblings get locked in deep, grudge-filled rivalries. Friends betray us and stab us in the back. Dads misuse and abuse their responsibility and power. Often on the flip side, they abdicate it and are absent or distant. Moms manipulate and control their kids to meet their emotional needs and maintain an image. And all of this shapes us. All of this has an impact on how we understand ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, how we see the world and relate to other people. So your mom wasn't trustworthy and she abandoned you, right? And so now you're the person who doesn't really trust anyone either. And you think you have this like sixth sense, this ability to read minds, and you can just see this person hurting you. Or you see them getting ready to hurt you, and you just say, hey, no thanks, I'm not gonna be in on that. So you're the one who leaves the relationship before they even have the chance. Or your dad was real passive, and he never spoke up for himself. He was just railroaded all the time. And you say to yourself, well, I'm not going to be like that. I'm not going to let that be me. I'm not going to let that be my story. So you overcorrect in the other direction, right? You become the person who always runs their mouth with absolutely no filter. And you're really rude and hurtful, but you always think it's the other person's fault because they're just too sensitive. Or the words of that pimply-faced little punk on the playground who you used to think was your best friend still stick with you every time you look at yourself in the mirror, even though it's 20 years later. And if you were really honest, you think that everybody else who sees you probably thinks the same thing too. Or maybe for you, it's a little bit more benign than that. Maybe for you, you were just taught to prioritize certain things. So you've chased career advancement your whole life, moving from place to place for success. And now you find yourself, for lack of a better way of saying it, alone, peopleless, and depressed. Or maybe you absorbed that life only had meaning and you only had worth if marriage and family were a part of it. But now you don't have kids and you might not get married. And if you were honest, you're a little bit bitter. And you think maybe God failed you. And none of that is to excuse our own culpability in all of this. Like, our sin is indeed our sin. Hear me on that. But it is rather to say that we do pass on the very things that we receive. Hurt people, as they say. And all of these things shape us. They have an impact on who we are. And in our own unique ways, we contribute to this waterfall of brokenness in our own lives and in the lives of those around us as well. And many of us just kind of lock in here. We just kind of let this be who we are and let this be our story. But what if there was a place where the red waterfalls could be redeemed? What if there was a new web of relationships, a new community, a new family, where the ways in which we were negatively formed by sin and our old kin could be unwound and reshaped into something even more beautiful? Biblically speaking, the good news is there is. That place and that people actually exist. You see, God is not simply in the business of family creation, but he is in the business of family recreation. He's not just in the business of family creation. He's in the business of family recreation. Listen to the words of 1 Peter in chapter 2, verse 10. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. To say it a different way, once you were not a family, but now you are God's family. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. What he's saying here is that through Christ, what God does is he makes those who are not a people, those who come from broken histories of sin and loss and displacement, and actually forms them into a new people in Christ. That Jesus, this descendant of Abraham, born into the world to bring that blessing to all nations, right? To bring that blessing to all families, to open up the lineage of God's family to every tribe, nation, and tongue. And that includes you and me. This is a part of the beauty of what Jesus has done for us. He makes us family with those who are in him. As John 1, 12 through 13 tells us, but to all who did receive him, to all who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. That is our identity now in Jesus. We are God's children who were not born, who were born not of blood, nor the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. We have talked about this so many times throughout the years of our church, that when Jesus saves people, when he shows us our sin and our need for him, and he draws us to faith in Jesus, we are born again into an eternal family. A family that will last forever, with God as our Father and every other believer in Jesus as our brothers and sisters. A family that will not fade, a family that will not go away, a family that will last forever as God lasts forever. We are born into a great eternal family. And this is the predominant metaphor that the Bible uses to talk about the church. 160 times in the New Testament, the church is referred to with familial language. It's everywhere. It's all over the place that this is who God's people are. To put it simply, salvation is a community-creating event, okay? Salvation is a community-creating event. Just as we are justified with respect to God the Father upon salvation, we are also what I would call family-fied in respect to every other person who bears the name Jesus. We are family-fied with our brothers and sisters in Christ. And much like that first chart, the church is meant to be something of a redeemed vision for our life together as God's people, where God's wisdom and grace now in us are shared and passed down through each generation, where elders are honored and their experience is valued as those who have gone before us, who have learned the ways of Jesus and can pass them on to us, where parents and married couples are buoyed with warm, loving support as they go about the hard work of raising kids together, where the unmarried people, old and young alike, know with full confidence that they are loved and there is a place for them within the family of God, that there will always be a seat at the table, there will always be a role for them in God's people, where conflicts and struggles and trials aren't endured alone, where gifts and skills are realized and utilized for the good of the community, where grace is shown and where there's always a place for you at the table, no matter how far you've fallen or how bad things have gotten. Where day-to-day life is shared together and we are shaped more and more like the God who saved us. That through that community of people, we become more and more like Jesus himself. And whereas our relationships of origin shape and form us in a variety of ways, for better or for worse, God intends to use this family through his Spirit to reshape us into the image of Jesus. That is who the church is. That is what we as God's people are meant to do and provide for one another. All of us. Every one of us is meant to join in with this helpful reshaping community that God has made us to be. Just listen to the way that Paul talks about it in Ephesians, that passage you heard read before we began. This is Ephesians 4, verse 11. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, to equip the saints, to equip the people of God for the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes, but rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, meaning when each part is contributing what God has given them to contribute, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. The way we've said it before is that the church is Jesus' school of love. It is the very vehicle by which he intends to make us into a people who love as he loves. It's the very vehicle by which he intends for his Spirit to help unwind the brokenness that we've committed and that we've inherited, and to be transformed by his love and his grace. The place where he wants to take those hurts and histories and bring the actual truth of God and his love to bear on those things, that healing and wholeness might be the fruit. That healing and wholeness might be produced in us. It reminds me, honestly, of the story of a dear brother of Christ of mine. And honestly, this is a story for a lot of believers that I know, but as I was prepping, his particular story just kind of popped into my head. But this brother of mine, like he grew up, he was one of those who grew up never really feeling at home in his own skin. I don't know if you can relate to that at all, but he just never felt at home with himself. He didn't really fit the cultural stereotypes of like what boys are supposed to be. And so he always sort of felt like he was on the outside looking in. You know, like there was something wrong with him, that he didn't quite fit in that whole deal. Like even inside his own family, he was made to feel this way. Like something was wrong with him. He was unable to connect with his father. In his mind, this was due to their conflicting interests, that he just wasn't into the things that his dad valued, but really it had more to do with his dad's own struggles and his own issues. But in his own words, he would say that, hey, I never really felt like I had a dad. I just never really felt like I had a father figure in my life. You know, someone who was there to guide me and show me what it meant to really be a man. That was just absent. And so throughout his teenage and early adult years, like he struggled with all kinds of sexual sin and all kinds of image issues in vain attempts to make up for what he believed he lacked, right? And along the way, he became a Christian and he knew that God had forgiven him, but he still felt out of place. He still felt not at home. Like if anyone knew the real him, like if somebody really knew what was really going on with him, then they would reject him, that he still wouldn't measure up, like he would never actually have a place where he could belong. But one night he's with his life group and he just says to himself, man, you know, I cannot live with this internal dissonance anymore. Like I don't want to live with this conflict. I don't want to live with this struggle and just all of this. So he works up the gumption, he works up the nerve to actually tell his life group who he is, where he's from, what happened to him, what he's done, to just be honest with them about his history, his sin, all of it. And he tells them, and he just kind of braces himself. He just kind of braces himself because he fully expects them to think that he's weird and to say that, hey man, we're out. We're gonna need you to to keep that, either keep that to yourself or we're gone. But they responded completely differently. Completely differently. Instead, they say to him, bro, we love you. We love you so much. And honestly, bigger than that, God loves you. And the truest true thing about you isn't your sin. And I want you to know that. The truest true thing about you isn't your sin, isn't your family, isn't whether or not you fit some cultural stereotype of being a man or whatever. The truest true thing about you is that Jesus loves you and you are his. You are his kid and you are in his family forever. And the thing is we're a part of that too. And so, hey, we're not going anywhere. We're with you, bro, no matter what. And over the years, this group just locked arms with this guy, right? And they followed Jesus together with him. And they became this community of fathers and brothers to him, helping him see what being a man was really like. They became these examples that he could look to and say, okay, this is what it means to follow Jesus. Okay, this is what it means to be a man after God's heart. He got to see their families, the way they loved and served their kids and their wives, how they gave themselves to the things of Jesus in the church. And he began to get this picture of what it looks like for him to actually be a man in God's family, for him to come fully alive as God has intended him to. These men became fathers and brothers to him, helping him see that being a man is more than silly things like sexual conquest and sports, but a heart and a character like Jesus. And now he's not this insecure, shame-filled boy, but he is a Jesus-loving husband and father who spends his life pouring into his wife and his children and everyone else around him the very same love and grace and hope that he received in Jesus. It's a beautiful story. And this is what God does through the church. This is what God does through his people. This is what it's meant to be, and it's beautiful, and this is what we long for. This is what we know we all need, that we crave. We know it's what we were made for, and the truth is that this is actually what we've been invited into. We have been invited into the family of God, and the church is meant to be the place and the people where the reshaping of your life into the image of Jesus can actually take place. Where the waterfalls of his love and kindness can overwhelm the waterfalls of sin, so that perhaps what was passed on to you might actually stop with you. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in the coming weeks, about how all of this fleshes out. But what I want you to hear me say is that this is who we're trying to be. This is what it means for us to be the church, to be this type of community where this type of formation can actually take place. But in order for that to be true of us, there are a couple of implications that we have to unpack, or at least one big one. In order for this to be true of us, it's going to mean that for many of us, we're going to have to reframe how we think about church. We're going to have to reframe how we think about church. We say it all the time, but the church is a family. It's not an event we attend. It's not a building that we come into, but it is a people that you belong to. And we say this all the time for good reason, because the point of Ephesians 4 is that you need a village. You need a village. You need a community of people who have gone before you, and of people who are coming beside you, coming alongside you, and of people who are coming behind you to shape you to be like Jesus, people who see the things you don't see, people who challenge you in the ways that you need to be challenged, people who share your burdens and whose burdens you share as well. And here's the thing. I know that many of us think we know this. I know many of you have been around our church for years, and you were probably tired of hearing me talk about how church is a family. Like, you feel like, I've got that. Can we please move on? But here's the thing. The current of our culture runs in the exact opposite direction of this. And you just have to know this. What we are aiming for is completely countercultural to every other relationship, every other way of organizing your life that our culture sort of presents to us. And it always pulls us away from the intentional pursuit of these types of relationships. We live in a culture where, as one writer puts it, our dinner tables are always shrinking. Our dinner tables are always shrinking. His point is that we live in one of the most, if not the most, individualistic societies that the world has ever seen. And the easiest way to see that is to look at our dinner tables, because long gone are the days when our meals together were marked by a large table filled with friends and family and relatives and neighbors, all and kids running all around and enjoying a meal as they swap stories and are jovial back and forth with each other. Gone are those days, and instead they have been replaced with the IKEA high-top two-seating counter. This is where we're at as a people. And the constant pull of our lives is going to be to do life alone. If we aren't actively pushing back against it, we will always do what is easiest and what comes most natural. The temptation will always be to think of family as the 4 to 6 people who live under my roof, and that the church is basically just a spiritual convenience store that we pop into when we need a little bit of refreshment. We think that the people that I give my life to, that the people I give my loyalty to, that I won't quickly dismiss, or to say it a different way, the people, this might be for the lack of a better way of saying it, the people that I would actually consider, if they called me in the middle of the night to bail them out of jail, that I would actually consider doing it for, those people, well, that's not the church. That's family, that's blood. That's not who the church is, right? But we cannot fail to see that the church has become our blood through Jesus' blood shed for each and every one of us. This is what Jesus has done for us. This is who he has made us to be. And as simple as this sounds, you cannot expect to be shaped by God's people if God's people aren't your people. Do you hear me? You cannot expect to be shaped to become like Jesus and reflect his love if his people aren't your people. It just won't happen. Maturity and flourishing will always escape you. They will always escape you. I love the way that Joseph Hellerman, the author of the book When Church Was a Family, puts it. He says it in perhaps my favorite way, to be honest with you. He says that spiritual formation occurs primarily in the context of community. Long-term interpersonal relationships are the crucible of genuine progress in the Christian life. It is a simple but profound biblical reality that we grow and thrive together, or we do not grow much at all. This is how it works. And if the family of God is to be this type of community for us, if we are to be this type of community for ourselves and for those around us, then we cannot think of it as an optional part of life. We just can't. We can't think of it as this group that I'll kind of participate with when I need a little spiritual bump or when I have an open break in my schedule, but rather a people that I am now integrally connected to, like my biological family before them. That these people that God has rescued, redeemed, and saved are now, in fact, my people too. We need the Spirit to open our eyes to the necessary inclusion of others in our innermost circle. We need to be reshaped into a people who understand why loyalty to a community beyond those who share our roof is such a critical value. We need to learn to rely on each other and how to show up for each other and how to become people who are counted on, because this is the very place, when we become that, it's the very place that God does some of his most amazing work. It is in that space that God will take the past sins, the struggles, the hurts, the shames, and begin to unwind them with his truth as we see it put on display and born into our lives through other people. To treat it otherwise, to leave God's family on the periphery, is to leave the very arena in which God manifests his life-giving power and hope to human beings in this world. That is what we forfeit when we forfeit the family of God. And I don't want that for us. Listen, as we begin this new era as a church, I want to come back to this. I want to remind us that this is who God has made us to be. This is what we have always been about. We don't want to be people who just kind of show up to a space on Sunday, sing some songs to and about Jesus, and then go about the rest of our lives without being connected to each other throughout the week. Because honestly, there's no spiritually powerful formation happening there. That's not where God does his best work. God does his best work when our lives are integrally connected to one another. When we are with one another in meaningful and powerful ways. We need this. If you're not in a life group, let me just say this. Join a life group. That's the space where the rubber meets the road on all of this for us. It's a space where God's power and his hope are put on display and where we are changed and transformed into the image of Jesus. And I want that for us. And that's what we've been about as a church. It's what we're going to continue to be about as a church as we go forward. But I will say this. In a perfect world, this would work perfectly, right? In a perfect world, it would be super easy. We'd hear this vision. We'd know that, oh, this is worth it. I need that in my life. I need to be that for people. And we just get after it, right? And we'd all begin to be this beautiful waterfall of God's love and grace into each other's lives. But, like I said earlier, the reality for each one of us is that we all actually have a lot of red in our waterfall, right? We all have a lot of red in our waterfall. As one pastor I learned from puts it, I love this. He says, we may have Jesus in our hearts, but grandpa is still in our bones. We have a lot of baggage. We have a lot of sin. We have a lot of struggle. We have a lot of pain that we're bringing to the table with the people of God. And while Jesus redeems us and heals us and uses the family of God to help accomplish that, it is rarely an overnight thing. And so the first step for us to actually become this type of community, the place where we have to begin, is we have to begin with you. We have to begin with where you're at and where you're from and what's gone on in your past. In order for us to be that type of community here, we have to first deal with what happened back there. And that's where we're going next week.